practicing Satipatthana as we are doing now, some, in particular Westerners, find it hard to accept the instruction not to think about it, not to think about the object when you are practicing. And the reason for this is that we tend to think that only if we think about it will knowledge arise. And people wonder, if we don't think, then where does knowledge come from? Well, if it's the type of subject or topic that requires reflection to understand, then, of course, only when you reflect about it will you understand. Some things are like that. But this is not that type of a situation. So when we think about it, what we're doing is taking something imaginary as real. So in this practice, something that is thought about is not real knowledge and not a real phenomenon. So the question has been raised, where does knowledge come from? And Sayadaw would like to answer this question today. If one doesn't know what kinds of knowledge there are, then it will be hard to understand his question. In the texts, it describes 3 kinds of knowledge. And one is called Suttamaya Jnana, the knowledge that we get when we study with a teacher or when we read a book. It's what we hear. Right? So it's knowledge that we learn from reading, and for example, children they listen to something and then they recite it, or they read something and then they recite it. So this is the type of knowledge that is called Suttamaya Jnana. It's knowledge that's obtained by listening or reading. And when we learn a method from a teacher or from a book, and then reflect on it, when we reflect on what we learned, that's called Chintamaya Jnana. That's knowledge that's based on reflection. So that's the second type of knowledge described in the text. And the third type of knowledge is called Bhavanamaya Jnana. And this is what we do when we practice. So we try to keep the mind clean and pure as we practice. And when the mind is clean and pure, the knowledge that arises in that mind stream, is Bhavanamaya Jnana. So it only arises after the mind is made clean. So in order to do this, we observe the object as it arises with aim and effort, according to the instructions for Satipatthana. So when seeing arises, we note seeing. When hearing arises, we note hearing. Tasting, touching, smelling, bending, stretching, opening and closing the eyes, blinking the eyes. Everything is what we observe. But at first, one can't catch all these different things. So at the start, we have to make it simple. And when we sit, we observe the rising and the falling of the abdomen, or the in-breath and the out-breath at the nostrils. And when we start to practice like this, at first we can't control our mind. The mind wanders. But the fact that we know it, that the mind wanders, is good. So at first, we come to see the mind isn't still or calm. It's running, and sometimes we catch it after 1 minute, sometimes we catch it after 2 minutes, but we come to know that the mind wanders. And then the desire arises to keep it focused, to keep the mind focused when we see how it runs away. So one applies the practice continually, aiming an effort, and eventually mindfulness arises and the mind becomes clean. Well, if this happens every other minute, for example, then in every other second, then in 1 minute there'll be 30 times that the mind is clean. And in 5 minutes, 150 times. So this clean mind increases as we continue to practice. It becomes more and more frequent. And gradually we come to see true nature naturally. So whatever it is, when we hear that, if we do this, we can get that sort of benefit. Hearing this, we need to search for a method to achieve the result that we want. And so this learning the method is called ugaha. It's just learning the basics about the practice. Satipatthana practice. In Satipatthana practice, there's 4 kinds of objects. And one is kaya, physicality. And then there's feeling, called vedana, how we feel something. And chitta, the mind. And then various or general objects, which are called dhammas. And these are the 4 things that we observe. And if you combine these 4 in sum, they can be described as just 2 different things. Rupa, which is physicality, and nama, which is mentality. Rupa is that which doesn't know. Rupa doesn't know. Nama is that which knows. Mentality knows. But one needs to just understand their basic nature. And if it's not clear, then we need to ask. So listen to the instructions, and then if they're not clear, one needs to ask. And that asking and discussion is paripocha. And further, in the body we have an eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. These are receptors, or these are sense bases. And then there's visible form, sound, smell, tasteable objects, tangible objects, and thoughts or concepts. These are striker elements, and they strike the base. And when that happens, there's consciousness. Seeing consciousness, contact and feeling. Hearing consciousness, contact and feeling. Smelling consciousness, contact and feeling, and so on. So we also need to know about this. And we need to listen with attention, and doing this is ugaha. And if we can't grasp this from hearing it, then we need to ask. And learning this way is called suttamaya jnana, knowledge that we learn through discussion is called suttamaya jnana, and we can also reflect on it with our own knowledge, and that's chintamaya jnana. But this is nothing real yet. This is we're just at the stage of knowing what's meant by an object. And then we also need to know about the truth of suffering, dukkha, the truth of its cause, samudaya, the truth of its cessation, nirodha, and the truth of the path to the cessation, magga sacha. And if we don't understand this also, we need to ask about it. And these are the objects. Dukkha is what is to be observed. These are objects that are to be observed. And this is just the summary. What we learn is the summary of the practice. And if it's not clear, then we ask, and that is called paripocha. for example, we're thinking about math problems, and if someone doesn't know math, then one has to learn the numbers, 1, 2, 3, and so on, their names, and this is ogaha. And if the student doesn't understand, then the student needs to ask the teacher, which is paripocha. And in addition to learning the numbers, one needs to know the operations, like plus and minus and multiply and divide. So one needs to know the symbols and one needs to know the operations. And then one learns, 4 plus 4 equals 8, 2 plus 6 equals 8, 3 plus 5 equals 8. One learns to add. And then one learns also to subtract. If we take 4 away from 8, we have 4. If we take 2 away from 6, we have 2 away from 6, we have 4, and so on. And then we learn how to multiply. 4 times 2 is 8, and so on. So we learn the numbers, and then we learn the operations. We learn the vocabulary. And when we understand these basics, then we understand the operations. And so we are able to, we have to, what is sadhana? Listening. Sadhana is, okay, so at this point we have sadhana, which is we've learned by hearing. And we also make a note of this. What we've learned, we keep it in our mind, which is dharana. We make a note of it so that we have it to use. So when we need it, we're able to do math because we've learned these by savana and dharana. And applying the math that we learned is samasana. And using the method, we get an answer, which is pativeda. So in the practice of satipatthana, we need to know the method, the basics. And if we don't know the basics, then we need to ask. And we need to remember what we've learned and apply it, put it into use. And if we apply it correctly, then the answer will result automatically. So what we need to do is practice based on the basics, knowing the basics. So how do we practice so as to know? Well, we need to note respectfully, note carefully, with aim and effort. So that is in sadhana. And when we study math, of course, we do problems and we gain skill in math. And then when we take an examination, we're very concerned about getting the right answer. But in practice, we can't have that attitude. We can't really pay any attention to, we have to have no concern about answers. All we need to do is put our full attention to samasana, which is applying the practice. So if we apply the practice, when the mind and the object connect, there will be rubbing, vichara, and the answer will start to come out. We'll start to see physicality and mentality, rupa and nama. We'll discern rupa and nama. That's the first answer. And then they are connected by cause and effect in various ways. This is also what we will come to see through applying the method. If we add to this process thinking about anything, we will never reach the answer. The essence of math is there's a method and there's an answer. And of these two, having the correct method for getting the answer is the more important. We need the correct method. When we understand the method, it's just a matter of doing the work of applying it, solving the problem. And in 1 second of applying the method, we get 1 second's worth of an answer. So if we need to have the attitude that if we use this method, we'll get the answer. That's the attitude that we have to apply to the practice. One has to, in math, one has to learn the method thoroughly, learn the method for solving problems, and then practice working them out. And when one does, the answers come automatically. So in this too, the method is more important, the correct method. And if our method is correct, then our answers are sure to be correct. If we think, as we're doing this, we're not seeing true nature, we won't discern physicality, rupa, and mentality, nama. We won't discern cause and effect, and we won't see how rupa and nama, physicality and mentality, arise and then pass away, are oppressive because of this, and have no inherent self. If we don't see these, there's no way that Vipassana knowledge will arise. So if that's the case, then we'll return home just the way we were when we arrived. So what is most important at this point is to use our time well. Consider the practice of sila. If we can't give up bad practices or misdeeds by way of body and speech, then our acts or speech won't be clean. And thus, these physical and verbal misdeeds burn us. And if one can avoid doing them, then to that extent one will get benefit. So if this avoiding of misdeeds comes from both shame, not wanting to dirty ourselves with the misdeed and not wanting to have the bad results. And we also, by avoiding misdeeds, we end up protecting others as well. So if we can avoid misdeeds, then our body and speech will be clean and lovable. So knowing that these benefits come, then acting to avoid misdeeds, we get the results as promised. So if we have basic sila, we get the benefits of having clean, pure, lovable physicality and verbal behavior. So these results are in keeping with what is said. That the Dhamma is svakata. That means it's well spoken. The results that are described as coming with the practice of sila really do come. One can see that they come when one keeps sila and avoids misdeeds. One's body is a large field of observation in which there are many objects to be observed. Objects of kaya, vedana, citta, and dhamma, physicality, feeling, mind, or general objects. Or in other words, there's the base, the striker, and the spark. These are the things that can arise in the large field of observation of our body. So as soon as one object arises, we make effort to get the mind there, and we aim so that the mind will be in focus with the object. And if we do this, then the mind will stick on the object, And this will create khanika samadhi, a momentary concentration. This is bhavana. This is a bhavana mind that arises. So we make an effort and aim to note the arising object. In this way, we start to develop the bhavana mind. And we do this repeatedly, again and again. We make effort and aim. And doing so, this bhavana mind can become larger and larger. It multiplies and it becomes strong. So how to do this? The Buddha gave the method for developing the bhavana mind. Note the arising object with effort and aim so that mindfulness is sustained. At first, one instance might not seem very strong or powerful, but gradually the bhavana mind becomes more and more strong, and one's mind becomes stable and the disturbances disappear. So in one hour, there's 3,600 moments of being free of disturbance, having a clean bhavana mind. So one needs to understand how to practice, and one needs to actually put it into practice. When the mindfulness is sustained and samadhi is there, then the pariyotana, obsessive kilesas, will be suppressed. So we need to learn the correct method for practice, and if it's not clear, we need to ask. And then we need to apply the practice. And if we do, we will get the benefits. And these don't come from thinking. So it's a matter of knowing the method and applying it, putting it into practice. One has to understand that if one can keep one's mind clean in every second, then in 1 minute, the bhavana mind is being developed 60 times. And in 5 minutes, the bhavana mind is being developed 300 times. So a true yogi should try to nurture this bhavana mind every single second. The Buddha said, Kaye kayanupasi viharati. So this means that in the group of physicality, kaye, in the group of physicality, one needs to observe the arising physical object as it is repeatedly. Anupasi means to observe again and again. How do we observe it? Within the group of physicality, we note it as it is. So, in the group of physicality, the rising, we note as rising. The falling, we note as falling. Sitting as sitting. Touching as touching. Stretching as stretching. Bending as bending. Lifting, moving, placing, standing, and so on, as they are. So within the large field of awareness of the kaya, we note the ever-arising object of kaya as it is. And if we have the practice of doing this, then the abhijja and domanassa, the longing, grasping and sadness, which would otherwise arise, don't have a chance to. It said, Kaye kayanupasi. Kaye kayanupasi means that we should note the object repeatedly. We should note the arising kaya within the field of observation as soon as it arises. again and again. If one can't observe it as soon as it arises, thoughts will enter. Like, what is this? So if a thought enters, if anything, if we can't observe it on time, if we stop to think, then we won't be able to catch the object on time. And if that happens, then we won't know kaya as kaya. We won't know the physicality as it is. And in that moment, the mind will be unclean. With what? It will be unclean with the ignorance, lack of knowledge, and knowing incorrectly. The mind will be scattered, and there will be no shame regarding akusala and no fear of akusala. At the minimum, these 4 mental defilements will be present. But if, on the other hand, we can observe kaya, physicality, as kaya, physicality, again and again, as it arises, then we will know true nature. We will come to know its true nature. And knowledge will develop. Therefore, there won't be any ignorance. There won't be any lack of shame or any lack of fear regarding akusala, and there won't be any scattering of the mind. And even if the object is something that is enticing and would cause greed, there will be no greed arising. And if it's something disgusting, detestable, no anger will arise. So every time we note so as to catch the object in time, we get a profit. If we think, as we're noting, we won't get this type of result. What kind of a person is able to develop the ability to note the arising object again and again and prevent the arising of kilesas? Bhikkhu. A bhikkhu is the one. And this word bhikkhu has a hidden meaning. Physicality and mentality are continuously arising, and most of the time our minds are unclean. Our time is just used up with things that aren't clean. One lifetime after another, we're born, age, sick, and die. Get sick and die. And what is causing this to happen are the kilesas. What is happening for us to have to go through lifetime after lifetime is a fearsome thing. This lifetime after lifetime without end. And one who fears this, who sees something fearful in this ever-continuing samsaric existence, is called a bhikkhu. In order to be free of samsara, only if we can destroy the kilesas will this happen. So a bhikkhu is also one who destroys the kilesas, which are the cause of samsaric suffering. One who practices observing kaya as kaya repeatedly, again and again, is such a one. For one who, yogis who are practicing, are true bhikkhus, if they are seeing, are able to note the object again and again, cherishing the practice, which can destroy the kilesas, practicing with respect and care, observing the arising object again and again to see it as it is. And those who aren't doing so don't qualify as bhikkhus. So having learned the correct practice of satipatthana, in essence, through ugaha, and clarifying any questions through paripocha, and applying the basic practice, having learned it and kept it in heart, as much as one can note effectively, whether one is a monk or not, one qualifies as a bhikkhu, because one who does so sees samsaric existence as fearful, and one aims to destroy the kilesas and is doing so with the practice from moment to moment. So if one has the attitude of a bhikkhu, of this type of bhikkhu, one who applies the practice with the aim of destroying the kilesas, one is internally a bhikkhu. And if one wears the robes but doesn't apply this practice, then one isn't a bhikkhu in terms of the suttas. Of course, in terms of the suttas, the way the definition of bhikkhu is described in the suttas, it's as Sayadaw has just described, one who aims to destroy the kilesas and who sees fear in samsaric existence. Tomorrow, Sayadaw will talk about the meaning of Kayanupassana. What does this entail exactly? And what does it mean to repeatedly observe the object? That's all for tonight. Sadhu, sadhu.